Hi, my name's Craig West, CEO and founder of Succession Plus. Today's webinar is all about employee share ownership plans and specifically about why they work and some of the performance metrics you can expect if you go ahead and introduce an employee share ownership plan. Let's have a look at why people are introducing employee share ownership plans as a good place to start. Simply put, they're a mechanism used to allow employees to own equity in the business that they work for with the express intention that they will think and act like business owners. And that alone, can you imagine if you've got 10 people in your business and you can get 5 of them to think and act like a business owner, the same way that you do about your business, care about things the same way you do? That makes an incredible difference in performance. And we're going to have a look at some of the details on that a little bit later. But let's have a look at why people are using employee share plans as a starting point. They're a pretty practical solution for succession planning for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it's a good option to sell your business to the employees. The employees are already in the business. They know a lot about the business. They're involved and they're active. The biggest problem is they typically can't walk up and provide enough funding to buy the business up front. And so an employee share ownership plan allows them to purchase the business over time. But it gives you also a gradual exit over time. And for a lot of business owners, that's a great way to transition ownership within the business. It's also a great way to retain key people. So even if you are looking at selling your business externally to a third-party buyer or a private equity firm, or you might even want to list it, retaining the key people is very important in terms of preserving value for the buyer. Getting the maximum price that you can when you sell the business will often be reliant upon you keeping good people within the business. They're also good for business productivity, and there are lots of statistics around business productivity improvements as a result of using an employee share ownership plan. Obviously, employee engagement and retention is really important. For most small businesses, it's all about the people. It's about getting good people, attracting them, retaining them, and motivating them to ultimately perform well. And lastly, we're seeing an increase in people looking to extract cash prior to them retiring. And an ESOP is a great way, and also a tax-effective way, for business owners to take cash off the table leading up to and before their retirement, whether that's to make contributions to super or pay out some existing debt or buy a property they're going to retire to up the coast. Doesn't matter. This is a great mechanism that you can use to extract that cash on the way through, as it were. Why is employee retention such a big issue? It's expensive to place new staff. If you've got good staff in your business, firstly, you need to find them and attract them. Secondly, when you get them, you need to keep them. You need to retain them. And using an employee share plan will ultimately improve and increase your ability to retain those key staff. It's expensive. According to most research, about 45% of an annual salary to replace an existing employee. So if you've got somebody today earning $100,000 and they leave, they need to be replaced. You've got recruitment fees, you've got training, you've got lost productivity and downtime while you get that new person up to speed, estimated to cost, up to $45,000, which is really expensive. If we can avoid that or minimize that risk, then that's something we should be doing as a business owner. A couple of quotes just to explain a little bit more about how and why this works. The John Lewis Partnership is a very well-known large employee share plan company in the United Kingdom, in the UK. There are 81,000 employees. They all own shares in the business. And it's a very, very successful long-term. It's been around many, many years, more than 100. It's very, very successful. The chairman here, Sir Stuart Hampson, or the former chairman of the John Lewis Partnership, talks about the fact that the employee share plan leads to competitive advantage and lasting success in good times and in bad. A little bit closer to home, David Thodey, who is the previous or former CEO of Telstra, importantly here talking about the fact that it's got to be a win-win. There is no better way to tune people into creating shareholder value than to actually make them shareholders. And I think that's universally true around what employee share plans are actually designed to do. You can't expect or require people to think and act like a business owner unless they are a business owner. And becoming an employee share plan member, you're becoming a business owner, in fact, and that changes the way that you think about the business you work for. But it's got to be a win-win, and that's a really important point as well. Now, how do we do this? What is it that makes the employee share plan? Why do they work? There's two key factors we're going to talk about here. The first one is a model around ladder to equity. How do we get employees to transition from being employees earning income up to actually owning equity? And we're going to look at that. The next one we're going to look at is employee share plan performance. What do the performance numbers tell us about what we can expect from an employee share plan? Let's look at the ladder to equity first. This model is based on a quote from Warren Buffett. Employees are keen to climb the ladder to equity, but someone needs to provide the ladder. And that's really important as well to understand what that actually looks like. Obviously, where we start, step one on our ladder, is simply a salary or a wage or even an hourly rate. And that's where most employees start. It's often where most employees finish. It's quite common. It's been used for many, many hundreds of years. And obviously it works. But there's no incentive here. Firstly, there's no incentive to different performance. You turn up, you get paid. There's also no retention strategy behind this. So you earn an income, but there's no retention mechanism built into this. Let's have a look at the next steps in the ladder. Step two is still an income model, but it's also about incentives. What do we do with commissions on sales, for example, or what kind of incentives can we give our salespeople? Real estate agents are a classic example. They typically earn $40,000. There's a great level of incentive payment given to them if and when they actually go ahead and sell a property. So if they're able to sell a property, then that makes up a large part of their income base for that year. There's two key problems with this. Firstly, it's all sales focused. And so we get bad behaviors, and I'll call them bad behaviors because they are in terms of the company particularly, where people discount, for example, to bring sales commissions forward. Salespeople within the same company will compete with each other to get the sale or the listing. And not only that, we've got this ability to make some decisions where we're going to defer income. So for example, it's now the 25th of June, let's say, and I've got no hope on earth of achieving my sales target for June and getting a bonus for June, but I've got a big order that I know I can get when I want it. I'm going to push that back to July. And we see salespeople making these kind of decisions. They push it back to July, which means they'll likely boost their sales figures in July and therefore get their bonus. Not a great outcome for the company, but this kind of payment model really does affect that kind of performance, and it affects behaviours and decision making of our employees based on the way that they're remunerated. And so where we can avoid that or limit that damage, that's something we should be doing. How do we do that? We move to a profit share model. And there's two very important things to understand about profit share. Firstly, it's no longer about sales revenue, it's about profit. And so the behaviours around competing for sales, it's not about individual performance anymore and my personal sales, it's about the company's profitability. So this is much more team focused, firstly. And secondly, by very definition, the word profit includes expenses. And so where we include expenses, we've got to start to look at costs. How do our employees contribute to those costs? Where can we save money? How can we be more effective in terms of productivity, etc.? And so profit share plans, we've seen profit share plans work quite well with business owners. They've got one problem, and the problem is significant. The problem is profit is short term. We're very driven now by short-term news cycles. You see CEOs and listed companies making announcements and reporting quarterly figures, and their share price changes accordingly. Whereas in fact, as a business owner, what I should be focused on is equity. What most people are in business for is to create long-term equity growth or wealth way down the track. Not today, not this year, not even in 3 years, sometimes 5, 10, 15, 20 years out. And those decisions are slightly different to the decisions we make based around maximising profit. And so if we can transfer employees across to equity, we get much better long-term thinking. We also get much better alignment with the business owners. If we both own equity in the business, then we've both got the same view and the same behaviours are likely to be exhibited. Lastly, the last step on the ladder to equity is really around control. If you're going to exit your business at some point in the future, then you need to hand over control. Somebody needs to run it or manage it for you. And this is a challenging step for lots of business owners, but we need to think about how do we get to the point where we can hand over control. And so that gradual transition on the ladder to equity over those 5 steps is actually something we design into our plans so that employees can move from income to incentive, to profit, to equity, and ultimately to control. By transitioning through those various steps, we get a really smooth transition of income, equity, and ownership or control. Now let's have a look at the performance numbers for employee share plans. This will further explain why they work when we're talking about succession for small to medium enterprise. Firstly, we get a couple of key things, and there's multiple numbers of research that's been conducted all around the world on many, many share plans. They're overwhelmingly positive. There is not very much negative research at all in terms of employee share plan performance. The key factors that we see are the companies that have got employee share ownership tend to grow faster, they live longer and ride out hard times better, they attract better paying customers, they generally contain a much better workplace culture, and their workers tend to be better off, which is often a myth. People think employee share plans are put in instead of salary and the workers are much worse off, etc. That's not actually the case. The research tells us that workers tend to be better off when they're in an employee share owned company. Interestingly, we're also talking about retention before. Computershare's done some research that shows generally, not quite double, but close to it, in terms of the average years that staff serve in an ESOP company versus a non-ESOP company. As I said, it's not quite double, but it's a substantial improvement. And then obviously the performance. Overall, when you've got engaged employees that own equity, they're involved in the company, they're participating in decision making, there's some open information sharing and teamwork, we see performance increases anywhere from 7 to 23%. And when you think about that number, 7% doesn't sound very exciting, but when you think about CPI being somewhere down near 2, it's a dramatic increase in improvement. And there are many, many companies who would grow substantially if they could achieve performance increases of anywhere between 7 and 23%, which is quite common when you have an employee share owned company. So I hope that's been helpful. It's a fairly brief overview of the why behind employee share plans. Why do they work? What are the mechanisms that actually contribute to the behavioural changes and the performance changes we see when we've got an employee share owned company? It does make a big difference. I hope that's been helpful. There are other webinars in this series that also talk about employee share plans, specifically around the mechanism of how they work and also about which employee share plan would be the best for you and your business if you are going to go down that road. Hope that's been helpful. I look forward to helping you implement an employee share plan when you're ready.